Thank you all for being here today. It's 2018, and we're going to have our first ERIE event of the year, so pretty exciting. And how many people here have not been to an ERIE event before? Show of hands. Oh, wow, look at that. 50, ooh, almost 60%. All right, congratulations. Well, welcome. You don't know what you've been missing out on, but we're going to show you tonight. It's going to be exciting and fun. ERIE is an organization, stands for Entheogenic Research, Integration, and Education. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that's doing our work in the Bay Area here. We started off at the California Institute of Integral Studies in 2011. We started a student group in 2012. The student group was going amazing. We were working with integration circles. We were doing a lot of educational events. And from there, in 2015, we ended up getting our 501c3 nonprofit status so that we became official now. So now here we are out in the world and enjoying a medley of events either here in San Francisco, or here in Berkeley or in San Francisco, or sometimes we do some events in Oakland as well. So we're bopping around everywhere, which is pretty great. We get to see a nice range of people and a nice range of audiences. What's nice about tonight is we have two amazing speakers that'll be here. We're pretty excited about this. Joe Tafur and Rachel Harris both recently wrote books. If you want later, we have Fellowship of the River and Listening to Ayahuasca books here on the table. Both of them came out with books at about the same time. Both of them are really well versed in this area, and luckily for us, we were having a conversation with Rachel, and we had a board meeting right after a conversation with Rachel, and we discussed in our board meeting, hey, wouldn't it be great to have Joe and Rachel come together and discuss and have a conversation about their books, maybe interview each other, really get into what their research is on. And literally the next day, Rachel writes up and is like, hey, I was talking to Joe. I'd love to come talk with him for an event. So that just somehow how ERIE things work. You just kind of it falls into place in a beautiful way. So today it's pretty exciting because we have them both up here. They're not only going to be giving a presentation of their books and their information, but they're also going to be doing a little interview for themselves as well, interview each other, so we can get into the nitty-gritties of that dynamic. The way the breakdown is set up is we're going to have about 15 minutes where they'll both present, and then they'll both interview each other for about 20 minutes each. After that, we're going to have about a 15-minute break for everyone to kind of mingle, say hello. If you want to do some book signings, we might be able to do that as well. And then the second part of the evening, you're going to have to be easy on me because I'm going to be running a microphone around to the audience, and we're going to do a nice discussion here. So we'll have a nice discussion. Anyone has any questions, we can have a kind of conversation with the speakers up here. So think of some questions, write some down. If you have any notes or anything, it'd be a good way to do it. I'm going to read their bios as well because it's always better to read what they wrote for their bios than what I have to say. So Rachel Harris is a PhD, and she's the author of the Listening to Ayahuasca, New Hope for Depression, Addiction, PTSD, and Anxiety. She was in the 1968 Esalen Residential Program and had a private psychotherapy practice for 35 years. Rachel received the National Institute of Health New Investigators Award and has published more than 40 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals. She lives on an island off the coast of Maine and winters in the SF Bay Area. Not a bad place to winter. Joe, our second speaker, however you want to look at it, is a Colombian-American family physician, originally from Phoenix, Arizona. After completing his family medicine training at UCLA, Dr. Tafur spent 2 years in academic research at the UCSD Department of Psychiatry and a lab focused on mind-body medicine. After his research fellowship over a period of 6 years, he lived and worked in the Peruvian Amazon at the traditional healing center Nihao Rao Centro Espiritual. There he worked closely with Master Shipibo shaman Ricardo Amaringo and trained in ayahuasca shamanism. In his new book, The Fellowship of the River, which is also over here, a medical doctor's exploration into traditional Amazonian plant medicine, he tells a series of stories and unique experiences on integrative medical theories. If you want to learn more, he has some website information there as well. What is really fascinating again about these speakers is that, unlike a lot of people who are speaking to this area, they've both done a lot of work themselves. Joe spent a lot of time doing this apprenticeship and doing work with Shipibo. Rachel's done a lot of work as well. So they're not just coming at it from an academic or a scholarly position, but they're also coming at it from doing the deep work themselves. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Joe and Rachel.
now that I've asked you to lower them,
Sure.
I think we're going to stand up, at least for this part, and then maybe when we interview each other.
Okay, I can come back.
So people can see us from the back.
Gotcha.
If you have an open seat next to you, can you raise your hand?
Probably a little higher. That's good. Yeah. Thanks, Larry. Well, I have the advantage opening up. So I'm going to first thank ERIE and Larry for organizing this and doing it so seamlessly. Usually that's kind of a painful process, and this was just so easy. And now for the taking advantage. Joe and I hardly know each other, but we discovered each other at MAPS, and I think we knew each other for a few hours of intense conversation, and discovered that our books came out the same month, April last year, and that we had very interesting parallels. I think both books, each of us, spent about a decade not just working on the book, but birthing the book, if you don't mind my saying birthing.
She's trying to cut me down already.
This is the nature of the relationship.
Emasculating me.
So you may as well see it. So in just a few hours, we developed this comedy routine. So, but the serious part of it is that Joe has a great heart, and I'm really thrilled to be here with him. And we've been having so much fun talking on the phone and getting to know each other a little bit. But this is our first time really together on stage. So thank you for coming. So, yeah, it really is. So I'd like to open up with just assuming that we're kind of a medicine community here. And here's my whole pitch, is that we used, I think the title is From Mystery to Integration. And my pitch is that we keep both mystery and the concept of integration, here's what I wrote, open and expansive like the night sky, like our visions. So what can we say about mystery? There's no way to define it. And equally so, there's no way to specifically define integration. I'm going to talk about different approaches to integration and different perspectives on integration, but I'm really asking our community not to define it. There is no one way. And even if I sound like psychotherapy is the only way, I don't really mean it completely. So mystery and integration, let's keep them as open as the night sky and our visions. So integration is still about set and setting, as sort of everything is. So traditional indigenous practitioners, Western psychotherapists, and scientists will all have a different perspective on the days and weeks following a ceremony. I'm sorry, I'm just a little distracted. I secretly wrote in Joe's book when he was out of the room. So I was just trying to catch if he saw it yet.
No.
He hasn't found it.
It's on, everybody. It's on. Get ready.
So here's a wonderful quote from someone who studied the Navajo healing ceremonies. And this concerns, I'm very concerned about what I call the golden hours, the days and weeks following a ceremony, where there's, from a neurological point of view, an optimum time for change. So this is the Navajo position. For days after the conclusion of the ceremony, this is a Vision Quest ceremony, the patient is considered by family and friends as if he or she is a holy person, and that's with capital letters, and given an opportunity to focus, evaluate, interpret, and experience a new self. And that concept of a new self and the time to reflect and be in the process of creating and becoming a new self, that really is one of the many aspects of integration. I was in Sebastopol, I think it was just last week, and I stopped at the botanical library that Kat Harrison has, and I asked her about integration. And her suggestion was for the person to do rituals in gratitude to the plants. Now, you can see that's a botanist speaking. That's not a psychotherapist speaking. It's a different perspective. This is someone who has a different set about understanding who the person is, what kind of process they're in, and where they're going. And these are all different perspectives, all equally valid. But the question for me as a therapist, and this actually happened, a version of this happened just the other day, what if someone wakes up the next morning and says, I just discovered I was abused as a child, or I never realized how much I hated my father. And people say this, and this kind of thing, I mean, many of us have heard this in the sharing circles the day after, the morning after the ceremony. And that's, I hear that as, I can hardly keep my hands off the person. It's sort of like a wonderful opportunity for therapy. I have to control myself. But, doing a ritual in gratitude to the plants is not going to speak to that specific need. The other thing I want to talk about, since we're really, I might talk about psychedelics in general, but we're really focusing on ayahuasca. And ayahuasca is unique in that it's explicitly therapeutic. And so I have my story in the book, but here's my rewrite of it. In ceremony, I've heard her consulting with me about my own case, my own childhood history, and it was not good news. I mean, it was worse than I thought. She basically said, I didn't realize the extent of the damage. Now, that isn't the exact sentence, but the second one is, now I understand. I mean, I really felt, she really got me, and she really understood. And I know this sounds like a therapist's voice, and I'm not surprised, but it was not my inner voice. There was surprise in this voice. I would not be surprised. But people experience the spirit of ayahuasca, the plant teacher, the grandmother ayahuasca. We all experience her differently. I did a research study about 5 years ago. It's published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs. And I had 81 people in the study. 57, that's 74% of them, said yes to the question, do you feel that you have a personal relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca? So these are all Westerners. The only criteria to get into the study was that you had done just even one ayahuasca ceremony in the States or Canada. So 3/4 of the people felt they had an ongoing personal relationship with the spirit of the plant. They communicated regularly, received guidance, support, and love. They communicated through intuition or psychic ability, through thoughts, feelings, visions, meditation, or prayer. They were able to ask the spirit of the plant questions in order to receive answers and guidance in making life decisions. Now, this is not, this is outside the Western sense of reality and how things are. So I have to tell you, this was shocking to me that it was 3/4 of the group. Even though I initiated the research project because I had heard a voice from Grandmother Ayahuasca telling me to do the research. So I had my own experience, but then when I heard that 3/4 of the subjects in the study also heard her, I was shocked. And this gives you a clue about some of the mystery and the contradictions and how do we live with things that don't always make sense to us. So I also asked, who is the spirit of ayahuasca? And she was described as a wise teacher, a grandmother, or healer from a higher spiritual dimension, an intelligence who provides guidance and loving, comfortive, protective support. 5 said she made cellular changes in their bodies, and 3 said they experienced the spirit of ayahuasca as a lover. So, and we were talking earlier, and Joe was saying that it was in Colombia. They talk about ayahuasca,
yeah.
so they experience the spirit of the plant as a man, as masculine, I should say. So, this, I was in great conflict over this whole thing for many years. I've sort of calmed down. But the most therapeutic thing for me when I was upset about this doesn't make sense, what does it mean, who is this spirit, what am I doing, what voice is this? I was able to ask two religion professors who are close friends of mine. One is Robert Foreman, who's retired now, but he's an expert on mysticism. And his response was, and I said, what is this voice I'm hearing? Who is Grandmother Ayahuasca? And he was very clear. He said, I don't know. And I said, all right, you don't know. But, I'm going to ask Houston Smith because, this is the ultimate authority. So I'm having breakfast with Houston, and I ask him, and he gives me the exact same answer. I don't know. And that was the most therapy. You can find therapy in a lot of different situations. This sort of gave me permission to exist with the mystery, to accept the mystery of what is this voice, who is this voice, what is the spirit, to accept the mystery. So I think in all my interviews, there are 81 people in the study, but I also interviewed another 50 or so, and then I interviewed people over time. And here's my statement. The relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca is central to what makes this medicine so therapeutic. I'm proposing that it serves as a kind of therapeutic relationship that can heal attachment issues. So let me, as a psychologist, take a minute to talk about attachment. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes left. I'm going to be very fast on attachment issues. Psychologists classify people after an extensive interview into different attachment categories that are based on how they were treated during their early years of life. So about half of us have secure attachment, which means we choose better partners and we expect marriages to work and relationships to be kind and helpful. And we have positive expectations and that often plays out. The rest of us have avoidant and anxious, and if there was abuse, then it's disorganized attachment. So that's often just wrapped up into insecure attachment, those three categories. And we don't make such hot choices. And then we have negative expectations anyway, which then usually come true because we've made a bad choice to begin with. But there's recent work in the psychology of religion where they're taking a look at people's relationship with God, how they experience God in a personal relationship. And it sounds and I'm not saying Grandmother Ayahuasca is God, this is an unseen spirit. That's the category, not God. Unseen spirit is the category. But that people feel that they have a relationship with Grandmother Ayahuasca who is always there for them, always available, positive, supportive, loving, kind, and filled with wisdom and guidance. And so I've interviewed people where I can see that their sense of self-esteem, their confidence in themselves and in the world has increased because they feel they have her always available to them, or where they've learned greater self-compassion, really because she has treated them compassionately in the communication that they experience. So there's a real relearning, and this is, in attachment theory, it's called earned attachment. And generally it's been thought that people can earn a secure attachment through a good marriage or a good relationship with a therapist. But now they're saying with a good personal relationship with an unseen spirit, whether you call that spirit God or Grandmother Ayahuasca. So it opens up, it's a different way of looking at the kind of change that's possible in the weeks and months following ceremonies, especially when a person is going to ceremonies every repetitive ceremonies, and then maybe working with a therapist, but there's this sense of doing inner work and then outer work in therapy and a secure relationship with the therapist, and then back into inner work and ceremonies. And you get this sense of a flow from inner and outer, from the unconscious into into conscious daily life. And that's what does the restructuring. And this is, you've all heard these words, restructure, recalibrate, reset, reorganize, reprogram, rewire. My favorite is reboot. So you get a sense of our programs can be changed, our category of attachment can shift to secure. And this is a very interesting, and I don't know if it's unique to all plants, maybe I'll ask you that when I get a chance. If there's another plant that has this kind of personalized, individual, clearly therapeutic relationship with people. So I think that's 1 minute left. So, here's my last sentence. Return to the mystery of the spirit of ayahuasca. So I hope this just opens up the possibility of thinking about possibilities of what integration can be, what it can look like, and that there's mystery involved in this process. And when I talk about that sense of inner work in ceremonies and then outer work in therapy, there's a lovely sense of rhythm back and forth, and it's one of the ways that our inner learnings get generalized into our outer lives. And that's really what the process of integration looks like. Great.
How dare you, Rachel? A lot of people came out tonight expecting a reality TV show battle. I just want you to know Rachel has agreed to be civilized, and I'm going along with that. Yeah, so thank you guys very much, and thank you, Rachel, for just coming into my life and as my beloved nemesis, and to ERIE and everyone that's putting this together and everybody that came out here just to kind of do something like this. It's kind of fun and different, you know. This is like that. This is a cultural activity that we're doing, talking about this. I think it's very interesting. So yeah, I mean, I think it is so strange, like how our two books came out at the same time, and that was, you know, that's why I made jokes about her being my nemesis, because the book came out and then her book comes with, because of all the similarities in the topics, it comes out immediately on Amazon, like every time you look it up. You know, there she is. I was like, no!
This is why we're
Right, yeah. Now we're getting to know her, yeah. We heard this psychotherapy talk. And so, you know, we were at the MAPS conference together and we got sat next to each other, right? I still hadn't met you. I was like, oh, I wonder if she's here. Of course she's here somewhere. And then we were sat next to each other without knowing, you know? And then you look and it's like, it's you! Oh my God, it's you! And then, you know, she gave her talk, which was a beautiful, one of the most beautiful talks at the MAPS conference. And if you ever get a chance to look at it, it's just like, when you talk about bringing grace, you know, and we're trying to figure out how to bring the mystery into our culture. It's like, well, when you see a really graceful person express themselves, you know, that's pretty much how it works. And she gave a beautiful presentation, and so much that the crowd was kind of dumbfounded. The crowd was just like kind of in awe, and nobody had any questions. So then I went up there to attack her, and she did a counterattack on me, tried to get people to read. There he is, read his book, everybody, here he comes, he wants you to read his book, there is a book. I was like, and then I asked her, why now? That was the big question in my, like, why did you release your book now? Because I'm thinking, why did I release it now? Why did we release the books now? And that was the really strange thing. And, you know, her answer to me was something like, well, the ayahuasca kind of orchestrated that. You know, and yeah, that's what I felt. And so, you know, we're going to create this dialogue and open it up to questions and all that stuff. And I just, you know, I'm going to approach it from the other side, because that's what's so beautiful about this, like parallel, is you have the North American kind of Western, you know, experience and perspective of this ayahuasca expansion. And then me, who's also part of that, but who did most of my work there in Peru, you know, in the tradition, and living in the tradition where where some of these questions never get raised, among the locals, because as you said with the Navajo example, where they're going to honor this person as a coming back, as a new reborn person and hold them in reverence, in this week and celebrate them. And they kind of already have an agreement about what that means, amongst them. They know what that is. They know what they're going to do, what that is. And there is an element of that, for me at least, with the people that I work with down there, the indigenous, the Shipibos, that is just, you don't have to explain that part of it to them. That we're all going to be, the spiritual part of this is going to continue when we come home, and because we are home, this is where we live, and we just did that, and nothing's really changed. We're still in that. And then here, the big conflict, of course, is like going to the ayahuasca ceremony or coming home from Peru to here, that big shock that that I'm part of the people that, dumped people into that shock, but in part because of the legality issues, and that's part of why we were trying to do everything we can for them, but eventually they're going to leave and go home. And the integration is the big issue. And the issue is like, okay, well, they're coming back to this society, and they're having a hard time finding this spiritual community to welcome them, the way the Navajos are welcoming each other from an experience like that. They're not finding that at their work or with their family and all that kind of stuff. And so then, we're kind of left to finding professional opportunities to integrate. It's like Charles Eisenstein talks a lot about this, about the breakdown of community in his book, The Ascent of Humanity, that now it's like, psychotherapy is a very advanced field, and to some degree it's also addressing a lot of people maybe that don't have someone to talk to, or the integration circles that don't have a community or a family to go home and deal with the way maybe some of these other, in the Navajo community, they would do it, with their family and with their brothers and sisters and all that kind of stuff. And so then we need to go through these kind of, I don't know, in a sense, more technical approaches, and perhaps they're more effective. And then, of course, they've brought up so many things and so much knowledge that the other side doesn't quite have, is maybe not sophisticated enough and is lacking in its ability to address a lot of these issues. And so we've learned so much. But still, it's that thing of like, what are people getting welcomed back to, and what's the resistance in the culture to welcoming them back? And so I think for me, it brings up a couple things. First is that one of the things that I explored in my experience down there, and what I wrote about in the book, is this whole thing about the interrelationship between our emotional being and mystical access. In other words, if we want to get into a mystical topic, we're going to have to go through the heart, actually, to really do it. And then that's going to be like, actually, we're going to have to deal with some emotional stuff in order to do that. And as a medical doctor, like since we're not going to go to mystery, because we're not going to even go there. We're not even going to go there, so we're not going to get that. And so if you have a society that's kind of ignoring the role of like your emotional being and your access to the mystery, it's going to be kind of hard to integrate, coming back, because that's going to mean everybody's going to have to look at those issues. And that's what a lot of the resistance is, I think, for me. Because it's like they come back, they just got their heart broken open. They just saw, and through that, maybe they talk to spirits and all these things, mystical things happen to them. And then they want to go to somebody else, but it's like, oh, but that person's still like in a very guarded place emotionally, society-wide. And that's like, I think that's what's so hard about the integration for people, because it's like, what is the reverence? What is the reverence that you hold for someone when they come back? And that's, I'm so impressed by, let me know about the time, because I don't know, 8 minutes. The thing, one of the things that I got really into in writing my book was the general theory of love by these UCSF psychiatrists. And I don't know, what I kind of got out of that book, and I maybe misunderstood, is that what the key to a successful like psychotherapy treatment was that the therapist actually demonstrated love. Like I don't know, that was really, I don't know, that's what I got out of it, that was the difference, like 100%, Like the different styles and techniques were not as, did not distinguish the treatment as much as whether or not the person was in a place where they could really hold like a loving, accepting reflection to the person, i.e. reverence, you know? In other words, and in that reverence, like what draws people to that reverence and what draws people to trying to open their hearts and open their minds, you know, and go through the pain of that and digging up the garbage that digs up and all the hurt and the confusion and all that kind of stuff. It's like, and then there's this extra little piece connected to something that you were saying about, okay, so this relationship with someone, and then there's a relationship with, you know, God, and then a relationship with ayahuasca, but then there's like this extra piece from the mystical side of the conversation is where, yeah, the reconfiguration and the recontextualization, the reboot, all that stuff, and then it's like there's an inspiration, and this idea of like, that actually, and this is this little piece, I think it's for me, it's just real, and I think it's real to people as well, is that it's a tangible connection. Like they're actually, it's not just they're connecting this relationship to this person that's teaching them about love, and this relationship to God that's teaching them about love, and this relationship to ayahuasca that's teaching them about love. It's like that's actually opening like an actual channel to divinity, you know, that people experience, that they're inspired by and they draw energy from. And so I think that's a really interesting part of it is, you know, this, you know, I guess it's a hyper-dimensional element of the conversation, and it's also just a very honest thing about just inspiration, that there's something about that we feel inspired and we draw energy from these things, and that, yes, we need to continue to do the work to make that stuff real in our lives and do the integration and get the continued support and do all that stuff. But a part of what that stuff is doing for us is maintaining that connection and helping us to believe and helping us to feel, you know, in faith. Because yes, it's to the Westerner, their concern about the whole issue is, well, there's so much doubt. What do we do with all the doubt? It's like, well, that's just part of it. You know, doubt is just your mind coping with this faith journey. And then the faith journey is like, it's not going to be through your mind that you're going to actually be able to embrace it. You know, and then these are, so I don't know, to me that's all part of the integration story. I don't know how that relates, but for me it does. And so that's some of the things that I want to bring up. And then another thought about that was just, that's how it related for me and on the medical side of things. Because it's funny because I'm always, people are saying to me, oh, why you always talk the science talk, and they want to hear the spiritual, they want to hear the shamanic, they want to hear that kind of stuff. But I'm saying, well, I'm trying to come across, I'm trying to convince, I'm trying to reach this Western mind, So I'm using science, I'm trying to demonstrate my case through science and measurement and the material and everything that people are more like culturally comfortable with to talk about and relate to. And that's very important, but it relates like to health. That's where the physical side, that's where the material side is so clear and undeniable, is that people's health problems can improve, with this kind of relationship to this divinity, to this energy, to this inspiration, to this all accepting love, and you see their body and their biochemistry respond to that. And that's what I tried to explore in my book, and that's, I get into the details of my theories about that. But that's I think the proof that people are looking for, and that's the proof that every time breaks down their argument. Like I say a lot of times at some of these talks, when people ask me all the time, how can you, and this is the issue that comes up in the Western society, Joe, how can you be a medical doctor and you're into shamanism, and how do you balance those two worlds, and how do you make sense of it, and doesn't it make you crazy? And the thing is like, I'm not even into it for that, really. It's like, it's about a person, it's about a real person that we're trying to help. And when it's your mom or your brother or your whatever child, nobody cares anymore if you got it all figured out. It goes out the window because it's not real, okay? The idea, the blah, 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 it's not as real as the heartache you're gonna feel That turns out to be one of the most real things there is. And so is joy. You know, that's going to be one of the most real things you're ever going to experience in life. And yet, I guess these things are unseen spirits. But it turns out to be like so core to our everyday culture and being in life. And I think that's the driving force, and that's how you make sense of it. Because you try to figure it out afterwards. You know, when you're able to heal somebody through mystical approaches and mysterious means, you know, everyone's happy that it happened, everyone's grateful, and we try to, you know, piece it together and learn what we can to be able to bring that to someone else. But I think to me, that's what's so important, you know, is those realities. And that's, you know, it's as real as heartache and it's as real as joy. You know, is the spirit real? I don't know. Like, we haven't figured it out. You know, when people have pain in their heart over loss of a loved one, it's like there is such a thing as broken heart syndrome, you know, on the books and the medical journals, but it's not clear, you know, how that happens, you know, why the chakra pains, you know, and yet everyone here has probably experienced that. So to me, it's just that. It's just like, yes, I'm a medical doctor, but first I am a living human being. You know, that's like all the rest of us. And so we're just trying to figure it out. So that's my intro. Ready for the attack. Fire away, Rachel. I've had nightmares of the crowd just cheering, finish him, finish him. It's like me, just a humble spiritualist against the academic juggernaut.
So I just want to say the best advice I got in graduate school about psychotherapy and private practice was from one of the oldest professors. And he said, if a client comes into your office and you cannot find a way to love him, refer him out. So that's,
Yeah.
So Joe, you kind of talked about mystical experience or the work through the heart. There's this real sense of the movement through the interior part of the body. And so I want to ask you a question about Icaros and how they move into the body.
Right.
So this is a quote from my book. Knowing a wide range of songs is not the point. This is not about learning music. The shaman has to have the Icaros in his own body. And then this is a quote from Joe's book. When I sang, I tried to gather all of the negative energies that I could see and lift them up and out of her. This is, so my question is, would you share about your own process of becoming, and then this is a quote from his book, a channel for mystical energy, medicine energy, how you sing into the person's body from within your body.
Right. So there's different traditions, right? There's different ayahuasca traditions, and there's different ways that they sing Icaros, you know, like, for example, the shuar and all that kind of stuff. I'm not familiar with those traditions per se. I've been to different kinds of ceremonies where different people sing different kinds of songs. But in the Shipibo tradition that I'm familiar with, that I'm trained in, and that I practice, you go through these diets, right, these long training diets to try to receive the energy of the plant medicine and connect. It's hard to connect so that you carry it, so that it's inside you, that you bond with it, you demonstrate sacrifice and humility, and you're asking for it to help teach you its medicine. And so what does that mean exactly? It's more just, it's a mystical thing. So you're trying to receive that energy so that you can carry that energy. And so then when you're going to sing to somebody, and you know, there's different degrees of how engaging it might be, but the goal would be that in our tradition, you're trying to prepare yourself so that you're going to be able to see into them, right? And so that's kind of this limbic resonance, you know, like how to get into that, like a therapist is trying to limbically resonate with their patient, meaning you're trying to, a good therapist, a good friend, a sibling, whatever, you're going to connect to each other emotionally to the point where you can kind of, it's just a human instinct. We all have that capacity to feel into the other person's experience, you know. You see somebody crying, it can make your eyes water, you know. They laugh, it makes you laugh. And all the degrees that is, and then in an intimate relationship, how good friends would communicate with a glance, right? And have a very good idea of what the other person is thinking, or at least what they're feeling. So that's kind of considered limbic resonance. That humans, we do that, and that there's a degree of that that's just mammalian. We can do it with dogs and cats and horses, and you know, there's some animals. That's not uncommon that people have that experience. So you're trying to tune into their internal world, you know? So you're trying to tune into their internal world, and you're asking the ayahuasca to guide that process. And once you're connected that way, then you sing the song, and you allow the energy to pass through you and to direct it through in this case, through the words of the song. So actually, they're actual words that I'm singing about what I'm doing. So just recently, for example, somebody was a friend of mine that I was working on, and he's just very shielded, you know. So he's having a lot of problems with his wife over some past thing that she did wrong. But it's not just that. It's this deeper trauma from before, all this trauma of his dad being so hard on him, and his just deep fear of being vulnerable and opening up. And so then I see the shield. And so I'm following the vision is informing me, and then I sing the energy to move that. And I use my imagination. So my imagination is going to interact with it like a dream. See? So the imagination is interacting with like a dream, and then what gives it more power, because you could do it without just imagining and visualizing. You would try to do that, you know, to play with your imagination. But because you're really trying to connect to this energy that's beyond just your mind, is what you're shooting for, beyond just what your mind is, then the plant medicine and the energy in the ayahuasca, then that helps drive it. It gives it the magic to make it go away faster. You know, so something like, wow, I'm trying to get rid of this thing, but I can't, it's not going. I can't get rid of it. I can't clean it. It's too much. Like, it's too hard. And then with the medicine, you know, then to make it happen in a way that makes you a shaman, in the sense that you can be more effective. You've been practicing that trick, you know, something like that.
You just mentioned the concept of cleaning it, and I think that's a very, I don't want to call it a metaphor. I think it's literal. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's back to that thing again of this continuum between, and this is a quote from your book, something about, I don't know, I'll probably lose it right now, but it's a quote about, I think it's just a continuum, you know, between the psyche and the material world. I think it was Carl Jung or somebody like that. Just that they are in continuum. The psyche and the material world, if you choose to accept that, they're in continuum. And then again, one of the examples is the pain of heartbreak, that you feel it in your chest, and it's real there. And so it's in continuum. So then what I'm cleaning in their psyche, and through this psyche, you know, psychedelic, psychosomatic, psychological, all that psyche, soul, I guess it means soul, right? But it got turned into all this other kind of thinking, but it's like their soul. And so I'm really trying to clean their soul at that level of like their heartache, you know, to where they don't feel it anymore, where the pain goes away. And so it's like, it is real that way, you know, where people finish, not always, but sometimes you sing to them and they feel a major difference, right? And the ayahuasca helps to open them to that. You know, when you sing to somebody, sometimes if they're not open to that or connected to that, the ayahuasca can make it easier for the ícaro to penetrate. And so then they can feel it, and it makes that feeling is what makes it feel real, like something's really happening. And so if you feel it, I mean, I guess you could be placebo feeling it, whatever that means, but they feel it. And then something happens and they feel a weight lift, something changed, something's different. So it's the feeling that indicates the bridge there between the psyche and the material world.
Thank you.
So you follow the feeling. That's how you do that. And ayahuasca tells you.
So could I go to I think this is relevant to this process that you're describing, because in order to do, this is very subtle, intuitive process you're following in yourself. I mean, this would be great training for any therapist to be able to do this, at even just a psychological level. So the question of discernment, and how do you know which feelings to follow, which are guiding you in a relevant or primary direction? How do you know?
Yeah. So discernment, that's the issue. And so discernment, as far as everybody, especially in something like an ayahuasca space, like everybody is susceptible to just projecting into that space. That's part of it, So that you always have to consider that, So that's just so that would be a regular consideration first, that you would always consider the possibility that you're wrong. So have that in your mind. Like they say, somebody told me when I was in medical school, at a time I didn't really feel like hearing it, but they told me, they said, "Oh, Joe, you could be a really good doctor. You could. But you know what your problem is? You think you know more than you know. And the good doctor is always thinking about what they don't know. Because as a Western doctor, discernment is crucial. There's labs and there's all that stuff, but there's definitely in a medical doctor's life, there's many moments where they have to make a call. And they're informing their system to the maximum of the metacognitive abilities. In other words, like mixing all the different databases, and allowing them to kind of create the intuition informed all these different ways and stacking them up and letting them kind of come up with the computers just says yes, or no. So there's that element of where you just have to make a decision. So that's another part of it is like, okay, I might be wrong. Number two, eventually I'm going to have to make a decision. I can't just wallow in the doubt forever. And so then I have to trust myself. And so then I have to go into my feelings, and then also consider the possibility, well, maybe I'm cleaning the wrong thing. And then the third part is practice. So then you get the feedback of the person, right? It's not like every time you're reinventing the wheel. It's not like every time you're trying to guess, is this gallbladder disease? It's like you saw it like that already a couple times, 3 times, 4 times, 5. So that's like Ricardo, my teacher, he just tells people, because it becomes a practice like anything else. And he tells the guy, hey, we've already healed somebody with just like you. I'm not just saying it, we could introduce you to them, and we could introduce you to them, and to them, and to them. And so the idea that there is a real experience and wisdom-based building, and so that you have to practice to develop your discernment, and you have to be wrong, and you have to screw it up, and to gain that kind of experience.
Thank you. So this is a little bit of a switch in topic, but before I do that, I want to say I've been watching Joe's hands all afternoon, and they're very subtle. And Joe is describing very subtle energies within his body, within his psyche, within his spiritual attunement and intuition. And the best picture of them is in his hands. And I'm going to make you right, I planned that. Okay, so here's the switch. So much of health is about prevention and healthy living. This is a medical doctor question, family doc question. Eating, sleeping, exercise. What role do you think willpower plays after the ceremony? And now I'll confess. There are many, many times Grandmother Ayahuasca tells me, do not eat those potato chips. I think it's pretty obvious I'm still eating potato chips.
No.
So how does willpower play in with her guidance?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Just on, I do want to just comment one time on the gesticulation, just for a second, that it's real interesting. There's a book called Imagination and the Meaningful Mind, and they talk about, it's a Harvard psychiatrist, very interesting, like academic book, and he talks a lot about like how metaphor, that the mind's purpose is like the metaphor machine.
Yeah.
And the metaphor machine, the beginning of it is relating different domains. Oh. And so in other words, you have to be able to relate a sound to a feeling, a thought to a color, a movement, to a temperature. Like those are just normal and things. And so it's through bodily sensation that we describe so much of our metaphorical experience. When they say like, oh, that person's words were so hard on me, or oh, their energy's so soft, or oh, I just feel like it's like coming down on me, or like all the spatial stuff. And so that gesticulation and in dance is very much an expression of like the consciousness of the sensorial experience.
Great, thank you.
But on to the family medicine question and willpower. Yeah, willpower is first is, people who are trying to heal themselves from like habits that they don't want. So yeah, the idea with the ayahuasca treatment is that you're going to help somebody get rid of some of the emotional dis-ease, that would lead them to wanting to do something, and they find an easier time caring for themselves or taking better care of themselves. That's true to a degree, and then there's still you and me and us and the willpower to make change in our lives. Mm-hmm. And so they say if you don't change in your daily life, your daily life won't change. And so the ayahuasca can show you and inspire you and illuminate you, but yeah, sometimes we need other methods, to do that. And it's not enough to do that for so many of us. It can show us the consequences and the bad, the guilty feelings and the whole nightmare of what we're doing. But then we're still left with the moment of choice to do it again or not. And that it leaves us to that. The plants are neutral on the human, choices.
But that's important what you said, the plant leads us to being conscious at that point of choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you try to remember, it tries to ideally inspire you to do it. And then, if you're a regular practitioner, then you just don't want to be feeling like that again. So that's part of what motivates you.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So maybe this is a related. We all struggle. How do you reconcile your own personal issues after all this work? How do you practice self-compassion?
Yeah, self-compassion that's like the big one, I think. And so first is because you tell other people to do it all the time. So then you feel kind of guilty that you don't do it.
Right.
So that's a good one. Just tell everybody to do it all the time and see if it sinks in. Then encounter people that put it in your face. That was my friends over there in Miami, these healers she's just like, Joe, the best advertisement for you as a healer is you. That's it. It's just, otherwise you're just kind of charlatan style, convince people to do stuff that you don't really believe and so then it's about trying to love yourself, and I think it's not easy all the time to accept, the decisions in your life and your own self and how you are right now. But it's just when I'm able to do that, it's because, and this is back to the Navajos, my Navajo medicine man friend that I've been repeating his phrases all the time, and he just says, we're always 24 thoughts away from where we want to be. We think, if I only just figure this out, if I can only just make that right, if I only just, if I just did this and that would make up for that, and then there's that, and then maybe I'll do this and then I could kind of relax on that one. And then he's like, but by that time we're way over here. And he's like, it's only here that you can actually contact joy. This in the present feeling of it. So just that would be a motivator for me, is just to accept myself so that I can actually feel what it is to be alive, and the fun of that is there sometimes. And not, I was talking to this guy in Sebastopol. He was kind of put off by people's attitudes of just kind of always being so caught up in their wounds that they couldn't celebrate. Whereas other people in different parts of the world who have suffering through so many things, but always reaching for celebration, not waiting for things, celebrate first, and then, maybe figure it out. So just giving yourself that space to be able to enjoy it, and realize that the only place you're gonna enjoy it is actually here right now. That's when you do feel that, it's because you're present. Those are your happiest moments of your life, when you're just feel so alive in what's happening right now. And just not that it, and of course there's circumstances that might make that easier for you in that moment, but just realizing that's where that happens. So you kind of have to crawl your way back there to get there. So I try to love myself that way, try to remember that.
Okay.
That's it?
That's it.
Brutal.
Was it hard?
No, you see what I mean? She's just it's just like an angel speaking, just leading you down this path. And now you guys can see what a jerk I really am. No, I we've been talking about, and to me it's very interesting, and I think it's great for you to say it, because of where you're coming from, that other side. Like you said, from growing up agnostic, and then having these spiritual experiences become such a big part of your life. And we were having discussion with my friend Ian earlier, and this is the ongoing discussion of what's real, Is the spirit real, or what's real and what's not real? And I think you do a very interesting job of exploring that topic. But then it seems like one of the big moments that, on top of prior experiences you had, but of course this experience you had around your father. Yeah. And maybe just sharing a little bit about what that was like, and how that kind of, where did that leave you with your worldview?
Yeah. Joe has just asked me about my very first ayahuasca experience.
But even before that, right? Didn't you have an experience?
Oh yeah, when he was dying.
That's what I mean. That's the one I want to ask about. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that was about 7 years before I fell into an ayahuasca ceremony. My dad was dying of heart failure, and I brought him home to my house to be taken care of by hospice. And if you've lived with someone, if you've been around someone who's dying, the breathing changes. There's what's called a death rattle, and the gaps between inhalations becomes amazingly long. So you wonder, well, was that it? No, he just took another inhale. And it went on like this for 36 hours or so. So it was very tense. And he was not suffering. We had hospice and morphine. And at one point, I was just walking across a room in my house that was adjacent to the bedroom that he was in. And all of a sudden, I flew up through the top of my head, out of my body, way up. And to say I was through the roof just doesn't do it justice. I was way out there. And as soon as I caught myself, I was terrified. And I brought myself right down, sat down in a chair, tried to ground. And I was literally shaking. So, in my psyche, I figured I should eat something that would ground me. But it was an amazing experience. And so my dad died within a day or two of that. And there was this one moment in the experience where I don't even know where I was up there coming down, but I saw the walls of the room rippling. And I'd been out here at different times, and one time during an earthquake where the walls of this large meeting room in a hotel rippled, and you could see they just rippled like curtains. And that's what the walls looked like in the room. There was no earthquake. I was in New Jersey. So, I have a whole bunch of spiritual friends. I begin asking everyone, what was this? And nobody really had a good answer for me. I mean, I knew it was an out-of-body experience, but that sort of didn't do it justice. One of my very spiritual friends who'd been studying Rudolf Steiner said, you traveled part way with your dad. Your dad is in the process of leaving his body, and you went part way with him. And that explains, my fear question is, had I continued, does that mean I would have died also? I honestly don't know. After finding an answer that felt right in my bones, Joe is doing this wonderful job of kind of indicating an internal sensing, intuitive function. And that's the answer that felt right. Then I found, it's Raymond Moody who did all the work on out-of-body, near-death experiences. And so many people had come up to him at his talks about a similar experience that he called a shared death experience. Often nurses experience this when they're taking care of a patient and they're right at the bedside. But family members do too. And it is this sense of traveling with them. I had a client from an indigenous culture who talked about his large extended family, and Uncle so-and-so went traveling. Well, that did not mean a vacation. He went traveling. He died. It took me a while to figure this out. He went traveling. It means he died. And that's what this out-of-body, I went traveling with my father. Where I thought you were going is about 7 years later, I find myself in an ayahuasca ceremony. It's my first one. And I have this incredible experience of a repeat of this leaving my body. But it's a replay where I'm not so afraid. And I'm able to go the whole way and communicate with my father and have an ecstatic, mystical experience out in the cosmos. So that sort of bonded me to this medicine.
Right. So, to me, I guess it's like, what do you think that, like, in our culture, like the languaging somehow like diffuses the power of such an experience? Like people, like we just kind of clinicalize it, or a near-death experience, out-of-body experience, like somehow that just, even though that's happening, like everyone shows up to the conference, they're all saying that happened to me, that happened to me, but then no one's talking about traveling, no one's talking about the soul, you hear what I'm saying? Like, why doesn't it hit home that people have experiences like that? Is it just because it just gets kind of washed away? Something like that happens, and then you talk to some people. And had you ever had anything like that happen to you before that?
I've had lots of mystical experiences, but not like that. Not where I went traveling like that. No.
Okay. So you had a lot of mystical experiences.
Yeah. I almost try and include this in every talk because this is my little thing. I want to, if there's any way I can influence the culture, I think this is somewhat what you're pointing to. Gallup and the Pew polls, PEW, Pew polls, they each took separate polls, and so these are statistically representative of the United States. And they asked, have you had a religious or spiritual experience that changed your life? Something, it was that sort of question. 50% of the people said yes. 50%, but nobody talks about it. There's no place where this fits in our culture.
Right.
This is part of what you're
The
talking
culture.
about.
I mean, there are. I think within a church setting, there are some churches where they do maybe talk in their community, but if they brought out into this kind, larger publicly, that it's like,
Right.
out of bounds.
Right.
And to me, what do you think of this idea that exposing that kind of experience kind of forces people to expose some of their emotional experience, and that might be what drives a little bit of like the cover up?
Yes, this story is still very emotional for me. I mean, it's my father's death.
Yeah,
He was
and
the
I don't want
second
to.
parent
Yeah,
that
I'm
died.
sorry about that.
No, don't be sorry.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's in the book.
It's in the book. No, I'm not complaining. And I'm happy to share it because it was so meaningful, and I want these kinds of stories shared in our culture so that it becomes more normative and okay. And yes, it is vulnerable. And I used to, I'm retired from private practice, but one of the things I would say to someone would be careful who you tell that story to, kind of implying, don't tell that to a psychiatrist. They'll think you're crazy.
Right.
Of sort of any kind of story. And I have one client I had worked with a very long time, and she's particularly gifted in a spiritual way. And she sat in my office every week for a year and a half. And I'm very transparent, even in the professional setting. Before she began to tell me about her dreams, which were off the charts, amazing and spiritual. But it took her a year and a half before she was willing to open it up. And then she began with a sentence that, I know what's coming because so many people have said this to me. I've never told anyone before, but... And then they launch into an extraordinary story.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what, just quickly, as a doctor, when people knew that I was doing this shamanic work on the side, I would get, these nurses would come to me like secretly to tell me about ghosts in their house. And, it's just all of a sudden they're like, oh, they want, it's out. It's just this unspoken, right. the unseen spirits. And are they just unspoken?
Yes, even, yeah.
That's like probably a huge part of it. And then talking about these unseen spirits, and then in the relationship with them, you talked about this, and then your relationship. So this book, is part of it is delivering this study that's very impactful and very important for people like me, her work, to establish in an academic kind of way that an ayahuasca retreat is as spiritual as a Catholic retreat.
I had two groups in the study. I didn't talk about this, but
let's hear that.
I had a group of people who went on a Catholic retreat for a weekend. No medicine involved, no mention of medicine. And they filled out the same questionnaire about spiritual experiences that the ayahuasca people did. And what was fascinating for me is, I did the statistics, and I was very ego-driven, and I wanted the ayahuasca people to come out with a higher spiritual score. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is where I was with it. And they did. 0.05 significant. No, maybe it was 0.01. And it was a very strong significance. It must have been 0.01. And I was really happy. I had this very sophisticated, famous psychologist co-author. We were both very happy. And then I was up in Maine, in my rustic cabin, outside in my outside shower. And Grandmother Ayahuasca speaks to me. And what she says is, there's not a big difference. In other words, sort of get off this. The ayahuasca group is more spiritual. Get off that. And just look at the numbers. Look at it again. They're really not that different. So I call up my famous co-author, and he's like 86. He's like, I got him out of retirement. He'd been retired for 20 or 30 years. I got him out of retirement. And I said, Grandmother Ayahuasca told me we should relook at the data. And it's not clinically significant. In other words, the way people answered the questionnaires was like a half a point, like a difference between a 3 and a 3.5. So it wasn't that big a deal clinically. both groups had very strong spiritual experiences. And so that's how we wrote it up. And when we were finishing the article, I said, there's really a third author here. And he knew exactly what I meant.
The third author, the unseen spirit, the uncredited, credited here and throughout the book. So yeah, I mean that paper and the publication of that paper is, I think, going to be very significant historically in this church movement around ayahuasca and people trying to get legal protection to form a church. And thanks to this work, then you're going to be able to, that will be called up in court. That will be the document. Say, well, it's at least as spiritual as the Catholic retreat, and should we stop Catholicism, kind of thing. And my mom is Catholic, and she's very happy being Catholic despite all the problems of the Catholic Church. So take it easy on me. So then this thing about the spirit guiding you, and you going along with it, and partially because it touched you so personally, right? Where this thing showed you something about this big mystery in your life and helped you kind of make sense of that. And so then one of the things, Pablo Marengo, one of his quotes that I picked up somewhere in his book, the ayahuasca shaman that's famous for these paintings and stuff, and he was asking himself, somebody was asking him about his approach to the spiritual, the mystery. And he just said, you know what, when I stopped asking myself, is this real or is this not real? And I started engaging with what was presented in front of me, like a whole world opened up. How do you feel about that statement and how that...
It's a beautiful statement, and it also describes Carl Jung's experience that is sometimes talked about as a descent into psychosis or a shamanic journey. But that same sense of entering into relationship with a spirit opening up a whole other world, and then being able to enter and move into that world. And Jung really says that I forget, it was at least a decade of his working in those ways, and the drawings in the Red Book are gorgeous. And you can find them on the internet. You can see a lot of them, and they're beautiful archetypes. But there's this, what he says about that time is that forms the basis of his whole psychology. So, these other unseen worlds have very rich information for us. And they entering into those worlds is transformative in itself. 4 minutes left.
4 minutes left, okay. Almost there. Now, for the real heavy hitters.
I'm ready.
Sorry about this. No, just kidding.
Yeah, right.
Just kidding. Well, and that's kind of like, and it's back to your question to me about the Icaros and this whole thing, because we kind of established this, the realization that being agnostic is a belief system,
Yes.
that it's a matter of faith.
Yeah.
And that's what I say to people sometimes. It's just like when they want to tell me, when it comes to near-death experience, they'll talk about it as, oh, that's just a side effect of the brain computer. Mm-hmm. That when the brain computer goes down, then the tunnel comes on, and the whole thing happens just as a consequence of the machine. And my point to them is, your argument is just as flimsy as my argument. Like, just because you have a pulpit, like, that's it. That's all it is. It's like that's purely your belief versus my belief, and it's you telling me I'm wrong and you're right, and that's as far as it goes. And so this idea of feeling into what's possible and going there, and then you have this quote from W.S. Merwin, the poet, where he says, capturing the enfolding quality of this love. So now we're just talking about love, inner sense of love, the love between two suffering beings, and the great sea of love that surrounds us all. Dante's, this is all Rachel's quotes. Love that moves the sun and all the other stars. This is the central teaching of Grandmother Ayahuasca and the secret of her great healing power. The challenge is for us to integrate this into our lives. So it's like love as the great mystery somehow. And then you talk about, you say, the poet W.S. Merwin captured the enfolding quality of this love in this little snippet. He went into the dream farther and it came. Oh, sorry, I don't know how to read the poetry. He went into the dream farther and it came with him into the day, and from then on was all around him. What are you trying to tell us, this kind of stuff?
W.S. Merwin is a very famous poet. He lives in Hawaii. He must be in his late 80s now. But he has partaken of ayahuasca. And the full poem is in a book, I think it's Ayahuasca Reader. It's Luna's book. His full poem is in there. And it's about, oh, you're going to have to help me here. It's really about, you know, those two books that were written about that shaman when someone got kidnapped.
Oh, The Wizard of the Upper Amazon?
Yeah. And so this is a poem that Merwin wrote about the Wizard of the Upper Amazon, which is, there are two books, and they're amazing. I mean, I read them, and I read them, and I asked myself, is this real? Is this real? But Merwin captures this quality of these other worlds as actually interpenetrating this world. So there's this sense of, we live in this matrix, this soup of a subtle world, a subtle realm, and a material world. And I don't know any other way, no better way to talk about it than with his poetic phrasing. But this is part of what I was saying to you, that when Joe is gesturing and describing what discernment feels like in his body, he's talking about subtle bodies and these other worlds that interpenetrate this world. And so that sense of going into a world, as Jung went into a world, and then the world is all around us. It's not like Jung came back up. He lived with that world all around him.
She's a very mystical woman, truth be told. All right, thank you.
So we're going to take a little bit of a break right now. If anyone wants to grab any books and have them signed, they can do that a little bit, but they're also going to be preparing for the second part of the talk. Also want to give a few announcements I forgot to give earlier. We have an event coming up on February 8th, which is going to be on Salvia Divinorum. We have some integration circles coming up as well, and a fundraising event in April, so keep an eye on our meetup shuts for that. And a workshop coming up on February 18th. Julie and Mary McDermott are going to be putting those together, so keep those in mind. And we'll take a few minutes break.
Well, if I can make an announcement briefly.
Sure, yeah.
We have some, there's a upcoming conference. Via Labache is here. Clancy, some major people working hard to help spread the good word about ayahuasca and plant medicine and doing it right and trying to help straighten it out and make sure that people find good information and healthy information and protect the people that need to be protected and protecting the vulnerable and calling things out as they need to be called out. And so Bia is one of the people that's spearheading a conference, like first kind of its kind, right? First, like Latino, but here, Mexico, no? There's been many. First one that I am getting invited to. It's like, you got the kind of like Arizona Spanish. Sometimes it doesn't always go the right way. But it's a super cool conference. It's coming up, and everyone's very excited about it. Plantassagradasamericas.net. It's plantas-sagradas-americas.net. Is there English translation at the conference? A lot of people are asking. No. This is Spanish speakers or people who want to learn Spanish. It's an immersion experience. Yeah, so please check it out. If you're interested. I know there's people here. We're at the La Pena place that might be interested in going, and I'm going to go, and I'm very honored to have the opportunity to speak, and I think it's going to be fantastic.
Right on. Well, thank you very much, Joe and Rachel. Thank you for a beautiful interview and discussion. This is the opportunity for me to run around with the microphone. If anyone has any, I see there are already some questions. Hold on a second, I don't run that fast. I can only go so far in the back too, so if I can't reach you, you might have to come up and say hello to me with the microphone. But any questions you want to ask, if you want to address it to both of Joe and Rachel, go ahead. If you want to specifically address it to somebody, that's fine as well. Just an opportunity to dialogue and think of something interesting. And should I go with the front rows here first? Okay, so there's already questions coming. I know people are excited. Here we go. One over here.
Hey, Rachel and Joe, how you doing? So one of the things I really appreciate about both of you is the amount of grace and beauty that you both hold. And I know that in order to get there, there's a certain element of humility that a person must hold. So it's kind of a two-part question, which is, can you speak to the role of humility in healing and getting to those aspects of the heart? I think one of the things that any of us who've dabbled in this world of plant medicine discovers sometimes the hard way is that there's an element of learning about humility that needs to happen. So the first part of the question is the role of humility around healing and accessing the heart? And then the second question is it possible to get the lesson about humility in a gentle way? I know for myself, I asked myself, did it really have to be that messy and hard? And usually come back and I'm like, yeah, it did. But I also
think
sometimes...
she's trying to humiliate us up here. Watch out.
But in the world of trauma work, like there's this element of titration and not necessarily needing to make things just beating people's head over it or flooding them and this, that, or the other. And so sometimes I also ask my question of, is there a way to gently, if humility is a part of healing, is there a way to gently, more titratedly doing it? Or is there an element of just, it needs to be messy and it's gonna have a period where it isn't that gentle? So, twofold question, take it wherever you want.
Well, I can answer as a pushy, impatient psychotherapist. And my greatest humility is when someone pushes me back and legitimately is right, and I apologize. So, I've done a lot of apologizing during my 35 years of private practice. But I think you're asking about humility in shamanic work, more specifically. And where I would come from with that is, when you're making choices, what situation and who you're willing to be in, enter into, and who you want to work with, I would really look for humility as a real priority. And I don't know what to say about any advice about recognizing it clearly. But if you look for it, you'll know whether it's there or not, and trust your instincts and your gut, no matter how highly recommended someone is. If you're not feeling their human capacity, then I wouldn't go to them. So that's my take. But I think, Joe, you have more to say about this.
That's so humble of you to say.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, I think like two things that come to mind is first, like you were talking about the gentleness of it, and yeah, of course, I think you like it to be gentle as much as possible. So I don't think in our approach like that I was a part of at Niue Rao and in general, like we don't try to blow people open, like you take them as far as they're ready to go. There are a lot of people think that's very important to just blast through it and they'll be happy afterwards. I don't practice that way myself, and so I'm not into that. At the same time, even going gently with people sometimes, it can be very difficult and painful. And that has to do with some degree their own resistance, right? Like how deeply is their resistance holding, that the humility is so hard to take. Like that's a huge part of it. And so then you're trying to guide and help that person and make it easier for them to accept something that's hard for them to accept, but it's very individual, like sometimes it's just really hard for any one of us to accept certain things and to hear certain things and take certain things because we're hiding from those things or we're resisting those things. So the healer has a role in supporting that, but the person has a huge part in that, There are people who are really open and humble, and it doesn't really bother them, like the things that come up. Like they're interested, they're excited, they're enthusiastic. And there's other people that just some things are really hard to take, And so I think that's just, you got to deal with it, there's some things that are just really hard in life. And so, I don't know, there's different versions of that for all of us. Like experiencing the death of my father, there was no way around that pain in this life. So I had to go through the pain. And it just wasn't, that's it. That's what I had to learn. And so there is a role for going through pain and suffering in this life. And we do learn and gain from that, and we try to be gentle with each other. And then in regards to humility in shamanism or in spiritual healing work, which does, go into spiritually oriented therapists, I just quote, this is something I quoted from Luis Mel Madrona, who's a Native American MD, in his book Coyote Medicine. And he says, if we do not remain humble and respectful before the spirits, those who would otherwise help us in the work of healing are likely to desert us. And so it's this idea of, if we're trying to be a channel, if we're trying to open something else, magical, mystical, supernatural, whatever you want to call it, we're trying to allow that to come in to be, to make a difference in a way that maybe I alone don't know how to do it. It's like you have to be humble to make space for that. And to me, that's about being an effective practitioner. So they want to talk their big talk and talk their big talk. And like, oh, you should be more composed, you're going to be the shaman of the weekend, you should be holding it together. People want to see that you're really composed. And it's like, but then when it comes down to the real thing, like, did the person get better or did they not get better? And that's what we're aiming for, is to be effective, and then realize that the effective path is humility. So it's not about just being meek. You're doing it to accomplish something. It's real. It has traction, It can make you more. And that's it. My dad was always big into that humility is like being humble is not just about like beating yourself up and I'm no good. It's like it's recognizing your pros and your cons together. It's balancing yourself. And so I think that's really important to remember, that being humble isn't about abandoning yourself, disregarding yourself. No, it's about honoring yourself and just making room for the parts that you may not be able to handle or know, or et cetera, et cetera.
Hi, I actually had a statement and a question to follow, but my statement is about reciprocity, and reciprocity as it is in the realms of Aya as grandmother, and how Aya stands and comes to us and offers us this huge ancestral healing, really on the DNA level, and how we can collectively or individually give back to her in the sense of what's happening currently in the Amazon with land destruction and the oil companies moving in and logging happening. We spoke about the breath, and we spoke about the rattling of the breath as happens when death is upon us. And if the Amazon serves as the lungs for the world, then we have to hear that rattling in this moment. And how do we give back as we've been offered this beautiful gift If you know of any organizations that are doing that at the grassroots level with all these amazing ayahuasqueros, if you can offer some of that to us. And thank you so much, Rachel and Joe, for all this great knowledge that's evidence-based. And Rachel, you also mentioned the Navajo Nation, and in this time, I'd like to also bring into all of our awareness what's happening right now at Bears Airs, and then we send out big prayers to our brothers and sisters who are trying to save this sacred land. Thank you.
For me, I love the Amazon rainforest. My family's from Colombia, South America, and I love the Amazon rainforest. And I think everybody that's drinking ayahuasca and benefiting from ayahuasca should remember the Amazon rainforest and be grateful, to the plants and to the nature and to the earth that was providing this for us. And it's so important. And there, there's a lot of ways to heal, of course. And I did like a breathing workshop, and it was very effective for me. Wow, I really like this transformational breathing. And so people were like, well, maybe you could just do this. You don't need ayahuasca. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. For you, that might be true, or for this person, that might be true. And for me, it's really amazing what we can do, with our own body, what we can do with our own body. But then I was also the person that was going to lead an ayahuasca ceremony later that day. And so I said, since we are going to do it, it's like there's also this other thing that nature can help us to do. Nature can help us to do these things. And I say it like at the Entheogenesis Australis and these other conferences, and people, they want to, they're just all, they're trying to psychedelics and the molecules, and they just figure it all out. Oh, we'll just figure it out on our own and just do all this thing, and we don't need to, And I just said, you know what? I see you guys trying to figure it out, and I just want you to know, I want to tell you, nature can help you figure this out. Make room for this nature that's helping you to figure this out, and protect this nature, because that's what it's asking you for. It is asking you for that. It is an exchange. That is totally legitimate, and that was my first thing, and that's whatever. My chapter 2 is this my experience with ayahuasca coming to me and saying to me, if you help me, I will help you. That was my first major experience with ayahuasca, and that's why I'm sitting here right now. And so from my part, I try to help the plants that I'm down there with. I try to help the communities that I'm working with. Temple of the Way of Light is an organization that's doing some cool stuff. They have the Chaikuni Institute and Alianza Arcana, the nonprofits that are trying to help teach permaculture in Shipibo villages. There's a lot of other organizations. I'm not familiar with all of them, but there are a lot of organizations on the ground doing stuff in the Amazon to help. Those are 2 that you could start with and go in the leads that they have. Ayahuasca Foundation is also doing related stuff. And there's a number of other people doing small-scale things, but I think it is possible to learn more. I mean, for me, up to this point, my gift, what I was trying to give back is right there. These people, these lives, and the forest that we're protecting, and the plants, and so to me, that's everything. And such a big part of the dis-ease is our unhealthy relationship with the earth, right? That's why we're suffering so much. And so then it's this reminder that these plants just are there to be able to help us. All we have to do is protect them. And there's so much more out there that might be able to help us, but we have to protect them. And then we're protecting ourselves, and it's this self-love issue. And so I think it is so important to remember, thanks to the plants, thanks to the Amazon rainforest, thanks, I don't care what anybody says. They want to tell me about the shaman, the indigenous, and all this stuff, and they want to complain about witchcraft and all this kind of stuff. It's that's fine, man. You don't like all that. But it's thanks to those people, we learned about this. And thanks to the ones that taught me, that I learned how to help some people. And so I really honor them, and they are the backbone of this, why we're here. And I think we should remember them every day, and I try to, and those are organizations you could start with.
Did you want to add anything, Leah?
Yumiak, yeah, we have Bia Labachi right here. Yumiak, U-I-M-A-M-I-A-C. Yeah. So that's another organization. So they're in Colombia. It's interesting. They are more organized than a lot of places, and there's been kind of a facilitating. And so, indigenous people themselves, so supporting indigenous organizations. There's IDICEP in Peru. I don't know. It's not as well organized, but it does exist.
But I just wanted to reiterate what you said, that for those of us who are benefiting from these plants, we can practice reciprocity by supporting them in the jungle. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So you're well aware of the MAPS trials for MDMA. Is there anything similar coming up for ayahuasca?
Yeah, well, there's. We have ayahuasca research masters are here in the room, but there is a number of ayahuasca research studies that already exist. You know, Brazil is one of the places that's going to be a leader and is a leader in ayahuasca research because of the legality and the presence of the plant there. You know, so here it's much slower for that stuff to happen. And, you know, Peru, hopefully one day, Colombia, hopefully one day. But for it to happen here in the United States, we have to go through all this stuff. This is the interesting ayahuasca research happening in the United States. Is asking people, well, I don't know, you want to go ahead?
This is the very first level of research. So for any kind of controlled studies, it's going to be many years away. And this is a medicine that's very difficult to get a controlled dose and potency. So in this country, it's going to be quite a while. Barcelona, also, they're doing research.
Barcelona.
But I just want to mention there's a big difference between the studies that are going on at Hopkins and NYU and I think UCLA with psilocybin and LSD. Those are studies that use a couple, maybe two, maybe three at most, experiences. And the therapy is supportive of those experiences. And especially in Hopkins, they're really focusing in on what I call the Big Bang. The mystical experience is the critical therapeutic variable. MAPS, MDMA studies, it's in the title of the study, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. So it's a whole new, different approach to psychotherapy that's using this incredibly empathic medicine. And I just want to make that distinction for those of you who are interested in participating in research or becoming a psychedelic therapist. It's a big difference how therapists are being used in these different research areas. So MAPS is of particular interest to me because there's a therapeutic process, not just support of the experience. So it's different. So thank you for raising that question.
I guess the other side of that question was, we have available to us the ability to go to Peru and sit in Shaktivo ceremony, but what we don't have right now is the ability of psychotherapists in the United States to use ayahuasca.
No, we don't.
Or ayahuasca ceremonies as a component of the healing skills.
It's going to be a long time.
So meanwhile, it's like, to me, in this kind of realm, and you got to credit MAPS for this as well, it's like this kind of stuff you have to be bold. The current paradigm is like, it doesn't know how to do this. So, there's different ways to approach such research. So one thing that we're starting through modernspirit.org, it's my organization with some of my friends, is to do this epigenetic research, at centers in Peru, and collect saliva swabs and try to prove like biomolecular changes from people going through traditional treatment. And then to also, and MAPS is open to this, for us to do the same thing with the MAPS trial. So we would just piggyback on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, which is a big deal, that it's a therapeutic context. I mean, it's a whole culture. It's an experience that you're going through. You're only going to do it 2 or 3 times. And, similarly, the ayahuasca, to me, the ayahuasca retreat, in these 10-day, 2 weeks and longer, it is, I mean, there, as far as integration and stuff, but still, there is long-term benefit in the studies that have come out, and loss of, like, grief, getting over the ICER study, this whole thing about, okay, well, if people aren't properly integrated, they're not going to get any benefit. But the research that has been done about some of the retreats, some of the work in Peru, they are getting long-term benefit. Just like some of the people are getting long-term benefit from the 12 weeks of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy without any further intervention.
Right.
So this idea of, some real potential healing from the impact of that kind of stuff. So I think there is a potential to study down there, what they're doing down there, and not try to pick it apart and make it into this clinical version of ayahuasca. Study what's going on down there, and people are coming up with creative ways to get research done, and academia is having to bend to the publication of these ideas, even though they might not fit the current model. Like just this book and the way it promotes the ideas that she's promoting is a very effective way of reaching the culture.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot for for your time and a really fantastic speech. I have a problem with verbosity, so I've just written this out in the shortest form that I can. So anyone who's spent time around an expert tripper understands intuitively the deep value of like the ayahuasca tradition and like the wisdom that's accumulated over years as to how to get like the therapeutic outcome from a substance like DMT or what have you. On the other hand, these medicines and healing trauma are proving indispensable in helping the struggles of like oppressed people who can't or won't spend $1,500 to fly to Peru for a week. You know, they're just out of prison, or they live in a trailer park in the Midwest and don't have any hippie friends, or they're, you know, gutter punks clandestinely growing Banisteriopsis in Golden Gate Park or something, right? And they just don't have the resources. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't deserve them. So my question is, how do we reconcile the desire to keep this practice sort of pure and not like just appropriate from people like, you know, Americans often or always do, while also permitting these medicines to permeate poor and kind of lower class segments of our society?
Is this ayahuasca for all?
Sure.
.org? For the change, for that level change to occur in our country, I mean, forgive me for being in a rather pessimistic mood about this, but it's going to, the only pathway we have is through the FDA. So I'm a little speechless. It's going to take so long. It's going to be so difficult. I mean, the most optimistic thing is the MAPS research on MDMA. And then what we will find, as much as I'm a proponent of psychotherapy, having spent my life in an office, it's true what you're saying is that people can change just with the experience of these medicines themselves, and that's a whole lot cheaper than psychotherapy. So once enough health institutions figure this out, which they actually are with PTSD, then they will see this as a much cheaper approach than psychotherapy. So I think eventually it will happen, but it's going to be a while.
I don't know how long it's going to take, because I think there's some tides turning, you know, and you know, marijuana legalization started happening really fast. You know, people have been pining away on that one for a long time. Well, that's impossible. That's never going to happen. And then, you know, just all of a sudden, tipping point, and it happened. And the, you know, MAPS, their assessment of that, and what they, in the studying the political strategy of that, was about proving medicalization is the road to legalization. They found out that the people who are voting finally to legalize, the undecided voters, they don't necessarily smoke marijuana, but they knew somebody that benefited from medical marijuana. And that was exactly the segment of the polling that shifted the thing. Okay, just like these women voters in the Roy Moore case, like, you know, this is political strategy. And so that's where you have to hand it to MAPS. I mean, these are public policy oriented people. So you have to be smart about these things. So they decided that, so then they're focused on that. Medicalization is the path to legalization. So they're gonna continue on their track to get MDMA medicalized and then see what that does, okay, to the larger society. That being said, people just doing MDMA here and there at the raves and all that stuff, yeah, they're not getting the results that they're getting from MDMA-assisted psychotherapy from this professional approach. So that's just like, you know, has to be clarified. The response is incredible that they're getting compared to what all the people that are tripping, you know. So we have to admit that there it's not just enough the self-discovery. You won't necessarily get. There will be some wonderful events that happen, but you may not get the benefit of the really you know, developed and advanced practice. So that's important to say. At the same time, in Peru, ayahuasca is legal. Okay, in other words, they're not worried about that. We don't worry about if people are doing it in a foolish way, if people are doing it in a negative way, in a malicious way, like alcohol. In other words, this is like, it's decided that putting people in prison over that is not really interesting to do. Even though you might disagree with it, even though you might think it's wrong. So like, in that sense, like, it's already everywhere. Come on, everyone, they can do their ayahuasca over here, over in the United States. So they're going to take their drugs over here, over there. And you might say you don't like it, but they're doing it already. Tons. I mean, has anyone stopped the flow of psychedelics with all this whole war on drugs? I think a lot of people are doing shrooms, a lot of people, tons. And so that's all going on. So me, I don't think that telling people about better practices and like improving the culture of that involves anyone going to jail. So I don't care if they're doing it. Let them do it. But let's try to show them what's possible. Let's show them how to do it better. That's more important to me.
Great. Thank you. Here's a question back here.
Hi. So kind of like piggybacking on the question of setting, and the way it was introduced to me was in a more of a traditional setting. And do you think that Aya can actually be introduced in the Western therapist office, or does the spirit of the medicine just wants to really be in the way of community and circle and singing in Icarus? And
I'm not sure how ayahuasca will be integrated into the medical or psychological profession. This is going to be quite a bit down the road. I want to tell one story from MAPS where they were trying to start a study, a controlled ayahuasca study, and they used the freeze-dried ayahuasca in capsules that they use in Barcelona for research. And that is a primary way of controlling dose and potency. But they wanted to do it in a traditional ceremony. And so in setting this up with the shaman and presenting the shaman with these freeze-dried capsules, the shaman said, "The spirit is missing. We won't do the ceremony. There's no spirit there anymore." So this is a complicated medicine that's integral to the way it's used and delivered. I don't see it happening in therapists' offices, but for some reason I feel very comfortable here. So I just want to say, I was in a ceremony a few days ago, and one of the people in the community said, "Well, I'm leaving." It was the next morning. We'd all eaten and shared. "I'm leaving. I'm going right to my therapist's office." About 40 minutes away. And I thought, that's brilliant. That's a wonderful way to do it. And he was, I talked to him enough. He was working really hard on himself. And I could see he was doing wonderful work. I don't want to say anything else except that to leave a ceremony and go to a therapist's office, it's a wonderful concept. So I think there would be lots of different ways of doing it.
That makes a lot more sense to me. And then on the topic of, FDA and all that stuff with ayahuasca, or just clinical trials and freeze-dried and all that, I think it's, for me, my personal interest as a practitioner is to go the religious route, to go the spiritual practice route, to not get involved in I'm a doctor, I'm a medical doctor, I'm very familiar with the healthcare system, medical research. I did 2 years of medical research. It's just like, it's not worth it to me at all. In the same way that I don't think like the health benefits of yoga should be controlled by the FDA, or the health benefits of meditation should be controlled, or the health benefits of people going to their Christian church. So these are spiritual practices that have been demonstrated in many arenas to have health benefits. And so there's a medicinal component. They're coming from a tradition that describes them as a medicine, but the tradition that I'm familiar with that's describing them as a medicine is for sure calling them a sacred medicine, a sacramental medicine, a spiritual medicine. It's never separated from that. And so that's what I always repeat, and that's the mantra of the modernspirit.org is, spiritual practice is spiritual healing. Spiritual healing is spiritual practice. So if I'm providing spiritual healing, it's my spiritual practice. It's not, and if they get health benefits from that, like the way they might sleep better after meditation, I don't think that it's an issue for the healthcare system to be concerned with. So I think that's very important. And then, so it doesn't need to enter the academic realm, and it can go this route, the way peyote exists here in the United States, and the way other forms of spiritual practice have been recognized. And now that we see that, it's comparable to a Catholic retreat, that there's room for that. So I think that's a much wiser way to go than trying to clunk it together and mix it in, because I don't really know who are these people that want to do ayahuasca in a therapist's office. People always, they raise this issue all the time, but I have not run into them, it's a very hypothetical. I get, MDMA in the office or in the hospital and psilocybin, yes, but ayahuasca in that setting, I don't know. They end up wanting to do it in a different kind of way. And so that's just the flow, That's the culture. That's the organic part of it. You don't have to legislate it. The authority doesn't have to figure it out. Like I say, you didn't have to teach America how are they going to spread the kung fu schools across the United States? It's just it just happens, It's just it's the little leagues. It's going just fine, That's culture, Culture. It doesn't. You don't need the book and the policy and all that stuff. Just culture.
Okay, I'm going to ask this question real quick. So I got a couple. Okay, real quick question I have for you. In the title alone, there's this idea of mystery and integration. And for me, that speaks to a sudden transformation and a gradual transformation. This mystery, this, and then this integration. So within that context, could you speak a little bit to the impact of these sudden transformations? I know Rachel spoke about quantum change, which I think Miller and a couple other people talk about. And quantum change, one of the significant factors of it is an enduring quality. It's you have the experience, and 20 years later, you remember that experience was really powerful. So could you speak, and I think maybe Joe was speaking a little this earlier too, where you don't necessarily need integration for the change to have happened. So maybe can you just speak a little bit about the impacts or the sudden shifts that happen and kind of maybe the core of that when we're looking at these, both how to help with integration or what we can kind of keep moving forward with in these sudden shifts that don't necessarily need the integration practices we're looking at today.
Right. I love William James. He's basically the first psychologist at the turn of the 1900s century, talked about discontinuous transformation. It's a fancy way of saying the change comes out of the blue. It's not a linear progression. It happens spontaneously. And I'm really convinced this happens to a lot more people than we know about in the culture, since nobody's talking about their mystical experiences. One of the things that they found when they looked at quantum change is people's values changed spontaneously. And they were more inclined toward relationships and less inclined toward consumerism. They wanted more meaningful work. In other words, people changed their lives, hopefully. And so, it's interesting that one of the most important questions in the research studies at Hopkins is, was this one of the top 5 experiences in your life? And most people say yes, that it's right up there. They even asked that in the Good Friday experiment in the 60s at I forget the name of the chapel. Even though I went to school there, God, what was it? Morse Chapel? Yeah, thanks. They asked the seminary students, and then actually Rick Doblin, 40 years later, interviewed some of those same people, and most of them said, yes, it was one of the top 5 experiences in my life. We don't know a lot about conversion experiences. That's another term for quantum change and discontinuous. There's another way of looking at this is people. A friend of mine, Diana Slattery, called it a bright trauma, which I love that phrase. It's a sort of an earth-shattering event, but it's a positive one. And it has as big an impact in a life as a negative trauma, as a suffering trauma. And people change their lives, but we don't, because there's no way to study it in a controlled kind of way. We don't know very much about how this happens. I mean, to a certain extent, AA is based on hitting bottom and having this kind of conversion experience. You know, the most amazing research that came out of Hopkins that has far-ranging effects for health and for the cost of the healthcare system is that they found people after psilocybin experiences stop smoking. Well, that will reduce the healthcare bill enormously. And I think it was 14 out of 15. Yeah. So, I mean, we're just beginning to pay attention to these kinds of experiences and trying to be, even if we don't understand them, even if they remain mysterious, we can still look at the impact that they have.
Yeah, so in the tobacco cessation study, it was yeah, I think it was 12 or 14 or 15, it was right up there, but yeah. They distinguished the ones that did, which was almost all of them, versus the ones that didn't. It was the degree of how mystical of an experience they had was correlated to whether or not they quit. So then that's evidence for that's a very physiologic, like tobacco addiction, people pretty much regard that as a physical phenomenon, right? So something had to have shifted in the body at the physicality in response to this energy. And so that the epigenetics is one area that we're trying to open that research because of the parallels between the kind of trauma, like these negative experiences that can lead to this imprint and this baggage in the epigenetics is one place. I mean, there's other places, but that's one place in the body we can show. And we can also show that those epigenetics are responding to love and a lack of love, to meditation and altered states of consciousness, to psychotherapy. So it seems like they'd be sensitive enough. That's what the book is trying to say and encourage that research. And now we have a Yale neuroscience epigeneticist on board and a University of Pittsburgh psychiatrist to really look at that, to say like, wow, is that where the spirit touches the flesh? Or that's one place we could measure it? Is that one place we could see a shift like that happen where a deep mystical experience could lead to that kind of change? That being said, we have to get back to the humility thing. So if we're praying for miracles, which we are, that doesn't mean we're going to get a miracle every time. And we're not just saying it's going to be a miracle and go talk around, oh, miracle, hey, don't you need your miracle? I can give you a miracle. Like, that's the same thing again. Now we're blocking. And so it's like, yes, in humility, we're praying. We realize that healing is a long road. We know that is true. Even if they have the breakthrough, there's still other things to deal with and face. So we always maintain that, and maybe a miracle will happen on the way there. And whatever we can do to help make that happen, well, that is our pleasure,
Great. Awesome. Well, that's all we have time for, but thank you very much, Joe and Rachel. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Joe's a very humble guy, and there was a question about, he's talked a little bit about the epigenetic study that he's developing with these researchers at Yale, but modernspirit.org, just so everybody gets that down, modernspirit.org. He doesn't like plugging it too much, but yeah, just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Rachel. If you have any more questions, we have some information from them over here.